As you all are just getting started on your journeys, I want to share the importance of our craft. The stories that we tell not only impact people and communities, they have lasting impacts on us as well. So I moved to Toledo, Ohio 1 week after I graduated, right down the street from here at Sanford Stadium. It was a really big adjustment, and for some more context, I went to a really small private school in Atlanta, Georgia. So when I went to my high school, I always looked at it as a small bubble. And then I went to the University of Georgia, and I thought here I was really encountering every single type of person. I thought I'd seen it all. But it wasn't until I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina that I really realized just how sheltered my experience was. I really went from one small bubble in high school to another bubble here at the University of Georgia. Not long after I moved to Ohio, I started at 13 ABC. I was assigned a franchise segment called Neighborhood Nuisance. And I really want to highlight that segment because it really taught me a lot in my first job after college, and it also taught me a lot about myself and made me realize what's important to me. In that segment, people would send me emails, messages on social media. They would even leave voicemails about buildings around the city of Toledo that were abandoned. Kids would break into them, squatters would take over the buildings, and they had become public nuisances. And I would have weekly conversations with the city of Toledo where we would see what can be done about those properties, hopefully getting them torn down. I did hundreds of those stories, and I really realized doing those stories that this job is a public service. You know, we're here to provide information to people and really impact their lives as well. And I really got very personally invested in those stories. It became just as important to me to solve those people's problems as the people who were experiencing those problems. And one neighborhood nuisance story that I covered that really changed my perspective, it involved a 93-year-old woman. Her name was Priscilla. Priscilla's only family in Toledo was her only son, who was completely blind, and he lived in a full-time care facility. She had issues with her next-door neighbor. They had a very tense relationship. She ended up having to get a restraining order taken out against him. It was a pretty intense situation. And during one of our Ohio winters, we got a lot of snow, and the snow accumulation on his roof caused his chimney to fall over onto her house. And they're already not the best of friends, so you can imagine that that did not go over very well. And so she reached out to me because she didn't know what to do. She couldn't reach out to her son. He couldn't do anything to help her. She didn't have any family. So she felt as if I was her only option. I started going over her house every week. We actually developed a really nice relationship. I looked at her like a grandmother. And she told me one day that no one in her life had ever been there for her how I had been there. And that meant a lot to me, and it really warmed my heart and resonated with me because that's what I'm doing this for. That's what it's about to me. And it means so much after completing a story, being able to see a tangible result from the work that I'm doing. So in that case, in Priscilla's case, it was getting that chimney removed from her house and, getting the neighbor to have to pay for all of this stuff and, really applying pressure to that situation. Another story that really comes to mind when I think about the impact that this job has had on my life and seeing how the stories have really changed who I am, honestly, was one of the first big stories that I covered when I moved to Ohio. This was an extremely heavy story to cover as a 21-year-old. Two women were leaving a club and they were shot and killed in their car. Between those two women, there were 8 kids that did not have any parents. And it just weighed so heavy on me, honestly. And one of the hardest things about my job, I work the night side shift, so I do mostly crime stories, is that I have to reach out to people who are having the worst day of their life, who, have just lost their loved ones, their parents, their sons, whether it's a shooting or a fire. And those conversations are always so hard to have because you really don't know what's on the other side of the phone. You never know what to expect. And so I called those two women's families, and luckily they trusted me enough to tell their story. And over the next few years, honestly, the next 2 years, I kept in contact with that family, doing stories as the killer of those two women was held accountable in court. And we developed a long relationship. And at the end of the day, there was only so much that I could do for them, but I was determined that I was going to do what I could for them. And so fast forward 2 years, when I'm moving from Ohio to North Carolina, my parents were staying at a hotel down the street from my apartment. And my mother, always being the proud mom of her son, she was bragging on me at the reception desk to the receptionist. And the receptionist got really quiet. And she looked at my mom and she told her, she was like, I know exactly who your son is. And it was the mother of one of those two women who were killed in that car. And she actually ended up crying, and she told my mom the impact that I had on her family and, how grateful she was and sad to see me leaving Ohio. And hearing that I made that impact on her life and her family's life, giving them a platform to be able to talk about these two women that were, ripped away from them, it really meant a lot to me. And that's what I realized, that's what I do this for. And this career is, let me say, these stories were not the type of stories that I wanted to tell when I got into the career of journalism. I think I'm a pretty happy person. I like to make jokes. When I originally took the job, I was supposed to be a morning reporter, which is very different than a night side reporter. The morning reporter, they go to, report on traffic, they go to car shows, they do fun stuff, whereas night side reporting, I'm doing mostly crime. And I realized that, that morning reporting job, that was not in the cards for me. And I ended up getting put on this schedule covering crime, but it wasn't something that I expected that I would be good at. And I ended up being very good at it. And over time, I realized that, no matter who I was talking to, I really stayed the same person. And I feel like my empathy and compassion comes through, and it makes people comfortable opening up and talking about the hardest things that they've ever gone through. And when I came to that realization, that's when I felt like I started to see my work improving. Sometimes I go back to my old news station's website and look at these stories, and I can just see how much I've grown over the last 3 years. And it's really amazing. And one of my news directors told me that he felt like he saw the moment that I found my voice. And that's a word that, a phrase that a lot of people use in this industry. And I think it's really important for you all to know that phrase as well, because finding and honing in your voice is so important in this field, because everyone's journey is unique, and it's essential to acknowledge that your perspective matters. You each have different stories, experiences that shape your point of view, and passions that drive you to get involved in this field of journalism. And I think it's important that you all don't shy away from those perspectives that set you apart and make you unique, even if you feel like you're not an expert on what you're talking about yet. You have something that brought you into this field and something that drove you to pursue these stories that we're covering. And one phrase that I love that one of my old news directors used, he said that authenticity resonates more than perfection. And I was like, that is such a cool line. I have to use it in this speech. And it's so important, because when I first got into this field of journalism, I would watch the news and I'd see different reporters and news anchors that I wanted to be like. And I found myself trying to emulate what they were doing instead of making it my own. And so when he told me that I found my voice, it put such a smile on my face, and it made me feel like I had accomplished something that I've been working on for so long. And I don't want to say, you guys definitely should watch the news and, find inspiration from different anchors, reporters, or even if you're not trying to be on the news, if you want to be a print journalist, you can still find inspiration in different sources. But it's important to be inspired by someone, but not to emulate them. Don't try to recreate other people's work, basically what I'm trying to say. And this industry is just extremely unique, and every day looks extremely different. That's one of the things that I love the most about every day that I come to work. I always say that this job is the perfect job for my ADHD, because every day looks completely different. I never know what I'm doing, but when the day starts, which is really fun. And there are good days and there are bad days in this job as well, to be completely honest. And I learned that early on, it's really impossible to make everyone happy. And as a people pleaser, that was a really hard pill to swallow. But at some point, I think it's important for you all to realize that, you're gonna receive nasty, rude, insulting, maybe even racist comments from people, but you can't let those things set you back. And one of my old coworkers at my first news station in Ohio, she told me that means that I'm doing my job. If people are upset at my stories, she said, you're provoking conversation. And that's really what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to inform people. And it really was something that I struggled with in the beginning. I would go through the Facebook comments on my stories after work, and I'd see people, saying that I need my journalism degree taken away from me, or just say, honestly, the most hateful or mean things. And after a few times of replying to those comments, and my coworkers told me that, I can't let it get to me like that, and to use it as motivation, and to, use this as motivation to make my next story even better. I don't want to give people something to talk about me for. And lost my train of thought again, sorry. I should have printed this off and not done it on the computer. But yeah, and I realized that provoking conversation and providing information to the community is the center point of really what this job is about to me. And changing people's lives for the better is what this job is about to me. And it's important for you all to find what it's about to you. Everyone at our news station really has a different goal, from when they come to work. We're all working on the same team, but really everybody has a different reason of what led them to this job. And it's important for you all to really have that conversation with yourself and decide like what you're passionate about, what kind of stories you want to pursue, how you want to impact people's lives, whether that be, like I do, like neighborhood nuisance, or, I know there's a lot of people in here that want to be sports journalists. Like, there are different ways that you can really apply your passion to make, this job better and work for you. And you all really are the future of journalism. And I'm really excited to see, the work that you all accomplish. I was talking at the table, I work with a girl that I graduated with. We worked the complete opposite shifts. We did not know that we would be working together until our first day on the job, actually. But that goes to show you that the people that you all are sitting next to in these rooms, this is the future of journalism. These are going to be faces that you all see for the next 20, 30 years. And you may not like everyone in this room, but that's the reality. You're not going to like everyone you have to work with either. But it's really important to make these connections because that's really what gets you far in this industry. And you need to trust in your journey and know that every day that you step into this field, you're contributing to the work that informs and empowers people and communities.